Seems to me nobody really noticed its passing. There were a couple of quick headlines, and then the news was shunned by the Nintendo commentariat, and frankly I wouldn't be surprised if most people had never really heard of Vanpool. But this is one of a slew of deaths in recent years from long-time Nintendo partner studios. Maybe under normal circumstances that would just be one of those things, but with the outsized success of the Switch and the success of their first movie and their theme parks, Nintendo are on a massive high at the moment, and you'd think the street should be paved with gold for first-party Switch developers. But it's not the case. Even as Vanpool has just joined the death pool, they're at least the third studio to go to the wall in recent years, after working with Nintendo for a very long time. Fans of the Mario & Luigi RPG series may still be mourning the loss of Alphadream, which filed for bankruptcy in 2019. Meanwhile, Skip Limited, who fans of Chibi Robo may remember with fondness, disappeared mysteriously in 2020 when, after years of radio silence, their website went down a good bit before their domain was due to expire, and their CEO, Hiroshi Suzuki, removed reference to the company on Twitter, and the corporate headquarters disappeared off Google Maps. Now Vanpool have vanished. Were they out of money, or were there other forces at work? Is this spate of small studio deaths part of something darker and more insidious still? Don your Detective Pikachu hat, ready your Pikmin hunting magnifying glass, and let's solve the riddle of this small studio slaying spree. First, let's get to know the latest victim and review the scene of the crime. Vanpool was a tiny company who mainly supported Kirby development, and they were remembered for the Dillon series, and the last game they really took a major lead on was Kirby Clash in 2019. However, they're also credited as a support studio with longtime collaborators HAL on Kirby and the Forgotten Land and Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe. The comment on their page is fairly cryptic. It just says, Vanpool Company Limited will be dissolved on May 31st, 2023. We have continued to develop games thanks to everyone's kindness, but due to various circumstances, we have decided to disband. We would like to express our sincere gratitude for the patronage we have received from all of you and apologise for any inconvenience caused. Now, Vanpool was never a particularly big company. The last game they developed more or less on their own, with support from Kensuke Tanabe of Nintendo EPD, but without another studio such as HAL, was Dillon's Rolling Western for the 3DS in 2018. This 3DS eShop franchise was originally pitched as a way to spin off the Gorons from Zelda, but Tanabe felt that it would be more interesting to give the series an original aesthetic. Now, there's no sign that Vanpool had the capacity for multiple teams, with some people working only on some projects, so it's reasonably safe to assume that the people who worked on each game pretty much map onto the number of staff they had available, an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. 2018's Dillon's Rolling Western had 20 names. Indeed, the number of actual staff members may be somewhat lower, as some positions such as freelancers and testers could be hired on short-term contracts or with non-staff arrangements. Plus, if people join or leave during the project, it's possible for both names to be credited without any overlap. Now, these low numbers are fine for a tiny 3DS eShop title and very healthy by the standards of many of the Switch's biggest indie releases, but they're very low by the standard of Switch developers on the more significant titles, who tend to employ 50 people at a bare minimum. Scaling up is a challenge for these studios, especially after the transition from the 3DS to high-definition gaming on the Switch, and the journey has not been an easy one. In 2019, games journalist Imran Khan spoke to the Kinda Funny podcast and revealed that he understood there were games slated for the 3DS in 2019, which ended up receiving the axe after the catastrophic debut of the 3DS's last first-party title, Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, which was one of the worst-selling games in the entire history of the Mario franchise. One of these was a Style Savvy game from Synsophia, and it's striking that Style Savvy, an IP Nintendo co-owns and might have every reason to wish to revive, has been retired, while the same company have partnered with publishers Marvelous to produce what appears to be an exact clone of the franchise, but under a different name, Fashion Dreamer. The jump from publishing 3DS titles to publishing Switch titles would have been a difficult and expensive one, requiring significant expansion, but Synsophia had a good track record of successful games in partnership with Nintendo. At a time that Nintendo was booming, it seems the smaller company received the cold shoulder. It seems to me the message from Nintendo is pretty clear. Scale up and we'll work with you, but otherwise, don't expect handouts. So is this what's happening to Vanpool as well? Corporate indifference leading to a smaller studio struggling and eventually failing? Perhaps, but there's also evidence that Vanpool had really dwindled away to a shadow of its former self in recent years in any event. Jun Taniguchi, the lead game designer of 2019 Super Kirby Clash, left to join Ilka and work on Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. And looking at the credits for Dillon's Rolling Western, it's also noticeable that multiple staff members seem to have left. In fact, although Vanpool receives a credit on Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I trawled through the credits of both that and Dillon to see who is in the main credits on both games. Not special thanks, but who are the people who are actually working on both games. And what I found, 3 people. What about the people on the team who are working on the Return to Dreamland Deluxe Remaster, but also worked on Dillon's Rolling Western? 5 names, including the same 3 people from Forgotten Land. And significantly, Dillon director and Vanpool chief Jun Suda received only a special thanks credit for Forgotten Land and received no credit at all on Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Would the head of a studio really not receive credit if he was still the head of the studio? And I guess you could say that maybe the rest of the team were working on their own big new title, but that's tricky when you consider that the credits on Kirby were almost entirely the very senior staff on Dillon. Main programming, action programming, planning, field design, there's no sign of anything left on the table. Vanpool was all in on Kirby development. Now, 5 names would be a small number at the best of times, but the company could still have continued, perhaps even grown and thrived as a support studio. However, Vanpool's story is not unique in Tokyo at the moment. The Japanese government's COVID support loans were incredibly generous, but still require payback. However, for a company with dwindling staff numbers, the cost of repayments would fall heavier and heavier on the people remaining behind. With office rental space in Tokyo beginning to rise in cost again after flattening due to the pandemic, my hunch is that those few talented programmers remaining behind saw the writing on the wall and closed up, safe in the knowledge that their long relationship, particularly with HAL, would hopefully carry them on to greener pastures. So in Vanpool's case, perhaps that was the reason for their fate. They didn't go bankrupt like Alphadream, they weren't thrown to the wolves like Synsophia, and they certainly didn't vanish without a trace in the middle of the night like Skip. It seems the company had come to a natural end, but the case is still not solved, because one thing that's not clear is why Nintendo appears to be so indifferent to the very companies that once provided the bread and butter title of their handheld games. But to understand Nintendo, you have to understand that their method of doing business is not with the companies, but with the people. When Microsoft and Sony show voracious acquisitive appetites, sucking in studios Kirby style, Nintendo deal with individuals. Eiji Aonuma once said of Shigeru Miyamoto, Miyamoto's always been that way. When Nintendo collaborates with another company, he sees the person, not the company name. What matters is their personal abilities and the level of trust with them as an individual. Of course, there were also business-level conversations, but during the creative endeavour, he doesn't think about companies. And we've seen this multiple times with the way that Miyamoto personalises his relationship with other studios that work with Nintendo. It wasn't so much the Capcom studio working on the Zelda games, it was Fujibayashi-kun's team working on Zelda. It wasn't so much Ubisoft working with Nintendo, but Davide working with Nintendo. When they stepped in to purchase a huge controlling interest in Monolith Soft, they weren't looking for the entire company, but they wanted to forge a partnership with those senior figures. And so, although the companies may be dissolved, the people there will still hopefully go on. Mario and Luigi director Hiroyuki Kabuta joined Monolith Soft and received a special thanks credit on Tears of the Kingdom, while other refugees from Alphadream are showing up in credits from games by smaller studios such as Mistwalker. And Nintendo hasn't fully abandoned smaller studios, but their work with Brace Yourself Games on Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, or partnering with indie developers on games like The Stretchers and Good Job suggests that they're being more choosy about the individual projects they're selecting rather than fostering ongoing relationships with smaller and more financially vulnerable studios. Still, while many won't be giving Vanpool a second thought, I wish the development staff well, and I'll be interested to see where they go next. Speaking of where to go next, if you enjoy these deep dives into Nintendo partner studios, check out the playlist on screen. Take care everyone, and see you soon.